So welcome everybody to this webinar on knowledge management and knowing the unknown. This has come about because both SuSanA and BORDA with Solidarites have recently undertaken user studies looking at preferences around knowledge management. While one is focused on the sanitation sector more generally and one is focused on fecal sludge management and emergency practitioners, it's still interesting to share the information. And I think because both studies were done about the same time, it's actually very interesting to see the similarities between the two. So those of you that don't know me, my name is Esther and I currently work for Oxfam, but I spend a lot of time supporting SuSanA on working to improve the platform to make it serve the needs of sanitation practitioners, especially with an emergency perspective, because that's my background. So I'm going to introduce you today our presenters and who we have. So the first presentation will be from SuSanA, and it's around understanding the knowledge management and capacity development needs of SuSanA stakeholders. So this was a massive study that was undertaken about 7 or 8 months ago now, where 3,000 respondents thereabouts, both current users and non-users of SuSanA, responded to a study, and then there was some analysis made around preferences for receiving and accessing information, and SuSanA is going to give us the top line on that. And for anyone who was at WEDEC in Nakuru, there was also a paper presented. You can also download the paper if you're interested. The second presentation will be a trio from Alberto, Emma and Amy. And this is around showing the preferences of emergency wash practitioners for disseminating guidelines in first phase and rapid onset emergencies. Amy, with BORDA, conducted a study as well looking around what information emergency practitioners use and how they like to access it. And now Solidarite, Emma and Alberto are using the findings of the study to see how they can better share learnings and case studies, and they'll talk through what they've been working on. And then lastly, we have Dorothy. It was supposed to be Dorothy and Steren, but Steren's not well. And Dorothy is going to be talking about Working Group 1 on SuSanA, which is the Capacity Development Working Group, and how the findings of what these two studies have come up with linked to capacity development and how SuSanA plans to use these to serve the platform. But also we're hoping that it will give some ideas to people here. I know there's a few of you who work on knowledge management, about some ideas of how better to engage the people you're trying to work with. Just remember that all of this is quite practitioner focused, but it doesn't mean that there aren't parallels that can be drawn for other actors. As you can hear, I'm not so strong on voice, so Dorothy is going to field the questions at the end. You can type any questions you want into the chat box, and the presenters may come back to you, or if your question doesn't get answered, we may ask it at the end. When we come to question time at the end, you can raise your hand using the buttons on the top left ribbon next to where the microphone and the webcam are. There is a button that allows you to raise your hand. If you raise your hand, then between Dorothy, SuSanA and everyone else will try and come to you. If your sound doesn't work, then you just type it in the box and we will ask the questions. Any questions that don't get answered, feel free to go to the discussion thread on the forum, and we will do our best to make sure that they get answered as quickly as possible by the relevant presenters, or all of them, depending on the question. So I think that's it for the housekeeping. So I'm now going to hand over to SuSanA for the first presentation, and I hope that you enjoy this and find it useful. So thank you. Okay, SuSanA, over to you.
Thank you, Esther. Hi, everyone. My name is SuSanA, and I work at the SuSanA Secretariat. And today I'm here to present selected results from the market study we conducted, focused on understanding the knowledge management and capacity development needs of. So I just want to give you a brief introduction to the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance. For those who don't know, we are a loose dynamic network of over 320 partners and 9,000 individual members worldwide. SuSanA has existed for over 10 years now. And our goal or the vision of SuSanA is to achieve sustainable sanitation for all and to contribute to the achievement of international development goals, which would be the Sustainable Development Goal for now. This is done to promote sanitation systems and sustainable sanitation based on 5 sustainability criteria. That would be health and hygiene, environmental and natural resources, technology and operation, finance and economics, and last but not the least, social and cultural institutional aspects. So when we take a look at SuSanA and the role SuSanA plays in knowledge management, we have 2 components. One would be the knowledge management platform, and the other one is the think tank component of SuSanA. The knowledge management platform contributes to a lot of tools that can be used online in terms of discussion forum, extensive library, and also a project database and several other online tools that are available on our website. And when you take a look at the knowledge think tank component, we are talking about working platforms, which we have 13 working groups where SuSanA acts as a catalyst from commitment to action and contributes to the policy dialogue and setting the agenda in sanitation. While looking at the KM environment, that is the knowledge management environment currently, one side of it is has all the actors and it's represented by actors who are providing products and services in knowledge management, and the other side would be receivers of knowledge management. And while looking at the core components of what entails knowledge management, we're talking about information management and then knowledge sharing among different partners and sanitation players, and then learning processes, learnings from different organizations, from different projects, and then communication, that is a meaningful exchange between people who are in the sanitation sector. There is a ripple effect that takes place in the process of knowledge management, that the first ripple effect would be creating knowledge processes and enhancing activities in each and every organization. And then the second ripple effect would be knowledge capital, that is ensuring that there's a multiplier effect that activates the second ripple, increasing the impact with tangible and intangible results within KM activities or any tools that are used. So this ripple here creates maximum level of impact. And based on this, the third ripple would be changed practices in organizations which have absorbed this knowledge capital and processed changes in their working style. And the last ripple would be the tangible benefit that you see, that is performance and improvement in the sanitation sector and how we provide sanitation services. Sorry that the 3 slides were not present, but now we'll move on to the market study conducted by SuSanA. So this was a very extensive study that involved surveys targeted towards individual members, and then interviewing several partner organizations, comparing different knowledge management platforms in the sanitation sector, and then reevaluating the performance measurement system of SuSanA, and also having a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis for SuSanA. We will first concentrate on the survey. There were about 3,000 responses from worldwide. In the graph, you can see that the distribution of how the survey respondents looked like. Several of them came from Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, although the representation from Latin America and Middle East were lower. It was a significant number. And about 50% of the people who responded were SuSanA members, and the rest 50 were non-members. Now, if you take the look at area of interest, like which sector these respondents came from, Majority of them were from the design sector and also from the health and hygiene, capacity development, training sector. And also a significant amount of people were answered the survey from the research and knowledge management sector. Although policy, management, advocacy, and donors were quite underrepresented, they also formed a significant part of the survey. When you take a look at what were the preferences for all sanitation practitioners to stay up to date, you can see that most of them preferred using emails, newsletters, and looking up information on the website as their preference to stay up to date in the sanitation sector. Then the second preference that topped the list was communication with colleagues and friends, people who work in the sector, and also attending conferences was considered one of the most important preferences. Now, the least preferences were reading blogs, finding updates in social media, and reading discussion forum posts and attending webinars. So face-to-face interaction is still considered one of the most important preferences for staying up to date in the sanitation sector. Next, we will move on to the knowledge networking preferences in the sanitation sector. So how do people like to network with each other was analyzed in this question. And we divided the results into two different segments. One is regional representation, like how people from different regions would like to network, and then depending on their area of interest, so how people from different sectors would like to network within the sanitation sector. So when you take a look at the regional preferences, you can see that all the regions preferred professional networks as one of the main important ways to actually connect within the sector, and then conferences came the next. When you take a look at social media, there was a striking difference between Africa and Asia. So social media is still not very predominant in Africa, whereas in Asian countries, people preferred networking even via social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter. And then when you take a look at the networking preferences depending on the area of interest, you can see that a lot of people from design and construction, sanitation practitioners who work on the ground prefer networking via professional networks, and then people who are in the policy or advocacy field like attending conferences. This can also be because of the access to funds practitioners have and versus policy or advocacy people in the sector. And then when it comes to factors deterring the access to right knowledge within the sector, the results have been split between low-income, middle-income, and high-income countries. We can see that in the low-income countries, cost of accessing material and poor internet connection are always the culprits. Still, there's a lot of investment needed in how low-income countries access sanitation information within the sector, and also internet is not widespread in several low-income countries to enable knowledge sharing. For middle and high-income countries, the situation remains quite similar. Sanitation practitioners or professionals feel that there is too much of information to sort through, and there is very little curated information that is available in the sector. And then the second problem that they faced was they did not have enough time available apart from their work schedule to look at different information that is available and contribute to knowledge sharing. Most of them did not have language as a problem, but the survey was conducted only in French, English, and Spanish. So the other participants who did not speak any of these languages could not take part in the survey. Moving on to the next slide. So these were some of the results from the survey that was sent out to individuals. And now you'll see some results from the partner interviews. Some of us spoke to the SuSanA partners to understand how they saw knowledge management in the sector. And most of them said that the reasons they would like to connect with SuSanA was because they would like to connect with other partners in the sector so that they can influence or create influence in the sector and increase their client base if they were profitable organizations, and also to be a part of like-minded community that thinks in the same direction as their organization. Keeping up to date in the sector was not one of the preferences for partner organizations, like the organizations as such, to join SuSanA, but they also considered that it was very important to be a part of such networks or alliances to share and disseminate their materials and their results. You can see that considerable amount of partners said they would like to join networks to increase their visibility and provide more credibility to the work they've been doing. Now, looking at the knowledge gaps, like what are the knowledge gaps that exist that prevent partners from doing their from achieving SDGs, is that the first major problem would be that their engagement with governments. So a lot of organizations still feel that there is very little information on how to engage with local governments and ministries while implementing different projects. And then it is also very difficult to find consolidated facts and figures that they're looking for. Often they have to browse through a sea of information that is available to find out what they exactly need. And then another knowledge gap that was identified was implementation models. Like there are very little business models that show what would work and what wouldn't work in the sector. So sharing failures is still considered a taboo, and there's very little practical project guidance on how to move forward different proposals, and then how to finance, and then what kind of stakeholder management should be optimal for different projects. And then lastly, many partners felt that there is no information on a marketplace. Like there is a physical marketplace that is existing, but somehow to reach this marketplace is very difficult in implementing countries, and a directory of several service providers in the water and sanitation sector would be really useful. Now, when asked what needs to be improved in the knowledge management sector to support progress towards achieving SDG 6, that is water and sanitation for all, most partners responded that it is very hard to figure out what the ground reality is and how transparent the processes are. Often the information that is provided is very funder driven, and it shifts emphasis, and often there might be different notions on what exactly is the trending topic or what exactly is the need of the sector. So this is mostly donor biased, and that's what most organizations feel. And then there is, of course, biased reporting, and there's not proper regional information on GMP data that is available, and how it links to the bigger picture. And then there is still a very clear need for face-to-face interaction in the sector, although there are different online management, knowledge management tools that are cropping up. And there's also a need to monitor beyond different projects to see what the real impact in the field is. Some also felt that there is very less data collected, or the data that is collected in the ground isn't really reliable. Now, what SuSanA did was we compiled the results of the market study, that is the surveys and the partner interviews, and we converted them into descriptions of average profiles of professionals from specific constituencies that are potentially using or engaging with SuSanA in some way. So by consolidating all their KM preferences, their likes and their dislikes about SuSanA, we kind of created personas representing specific target groups. For example, now you'll be able to see one persona which we created in detail. Now this person is not a real person. We consolidated all the survey responses from different respondents all over the world to create and compile them into one specific group where most of them showed similar responses and created a different persona out of it. You'll be able to see this persona which represents the national NGOs. So Priya, this fake person, is representing the knowledge requirements and knowledge management needs of national NGO workers or implementing NGOs. You can see how they like to receive knowledge, how they like to share knowledge online, and what kind of interaction they would like to have with the online knowledge management platform like SuSanA, and what their interests in WASH are. Further, you'd be able to see what are the needs of a person working in implementing NGOs, and then what are their challenges, what challenges they face. You can see, for example, the person from the NGO says that financing and technical challenges and links to other sectors, behavior change and community mobilization are one of some of the key challenges that the implementing NGOs face. And then she also says that cost for accessing materials and too much information and poor internet connection is preventing her from accessing the right sanitation information. Now, this persona also says what he or she likes about SuSanA and what he or she dislikes about SuSanA, and what are the targets they want to achieve. So similar to this detailed persona you see here, we created several other personas within the sanitation sector, and that would be the government officials, donors, implementing NGOs, consultants, international NGOs, CBOs, community-based organizations, entrepreneurs, and academic professionals.
Time, Shabana, sorry.
So what I would like to conclude is that we've created different personas now, and we would like to develop them into user profiles for an online platform. And then there is a requirement for further mapping of different members and other non-members to identify more personas in the sector. This way we'd be able to achieve target-oriented, effective knowledge sharing within the sector and curate information for different sanitation stakeholders. Yeah, thank you.
Any questions from the floor on this one? I'm just trying to see if there was something from Dan about the chapter for the Central American region. There is no chapter at the moment for Central America, right, Shabana? I'm not sure if there are plans to have one.
Yes, we're soon opening a Latin America chapter, which will be launched probably early or late next year. And the regional chapter will have specific targets and a timeline to achieve all these different targets, and the working language would most obviously be Spanish.
Yeah, there is already a chapter, well, the other chapters are already working, and I guess Mina started, middle of 2017, and it's been a bit of a learning curve about how to manage the regional chapters, but I think we're getting a good model. I don't know if that's your feeling as well.
Yeah, and we also have the India chapter. Yeah, that has been operating for 2 years now, but each regional chapter has its own challenges, and no two regional chapters look the same, so it really is very region specific.
Okay, thanks, Shwana. Right, there are no questions from the floor at this stage, so I think we will, oh, here we go. How can you know why the sampling was skewed towards sub-Saharan Africa and Asia?
I'm sorry?
How do you know why the sampling was skewed towards sub-Saharan Africa and Asia?
Actually, it was skewed towards that because most of the survey respondents came from that area. We did not have a control over different regions. We circulated the survey globally, and most of the respondents came from Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. That's because I think the challenges there are pretty high, and most sanitation implementation programs are focusing on these regions.
There may be some more questions coming through, but I'm going to move on to the next presentation, and we'll move questions till the end. So thank you very much, SuSanA. That was really interesting. Our next presenters are Amy, Alberto, and Emma. So we're going to present to you today some of the research findings that we published in mid-2018 in a report called Preparing to be Unprepared. And I'll put the link to the report in the chat box here. Because of time constraints today, we'll only really touch on some of the more key discussion points that align somehow with what SuSanA just presented. And then I'll hand over to my colleagues Alberto and Emma from Solidarity International, who are working on bringing this research into action. They'll present to you their method for disseminating this knowledge and guidance on the topic. And then we hope and look forward to hearing some of your feedback, your comments or questions, etc. at the end. All right. So, yeah, basically I'm going to fly through background context, methodology. I'll probably exclude, but we can talk about it again. I'll put my contact details up as well, so if anybody wants to discuss that later. Then also just look at some of the key findings, and then Alberto and Emma will discuss some of the action for dissemination of knowledge. Okay, so as WASH practitioners, we've probably noticed the rapid kind of increase in the fecal sludge management sector, especially over the past 10 years. So this was also true in the emergency sector, and we've seen a number of different innovations and technologies for a variety of contexts within the emergency sector emerging. However, there's still a gap in managing the disposal of fecal sludge during first phase emergencies. This was highlighted in a report that was published in the late 2014, and it highlighted this issue of fecal sludge management, noting that improvement of fecal sludge management in emergencies is a challenge requiring urgent attention. So I know that there's a number of people attending this webinar now that are also working in the WASH humanitarian sector, so I'll be interested to share some of your experiences as well. So on the back of this, LRAD, or the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, provided some funding to address this problem. So at the initiation of this project, we were asking, okay, what is this gap? Is it a gap in knowledge? Is it a gap in information? Why are we still falling short of proper fecal sludge management practices in first phase emergency? Is it operational, or is it contextual constraints, or a combination of these factors? So it was these questions that we attempted to understand and answer in the research report. Okay, so briefly, as I said, we started out to look at what guidance currently existed on the topic. So we compiled and analyzed key guidance available, so in books, online, or research reports that are available for guiding practitioners in fecal sludge management in first phase emergencies. So in general, the guidance could be categorized somehow into 4 major categories. These were assessment tools, so these look like decision support tools, decision trees, and comparison tables. Then also process guides and documents. These are more like step-by-step how-to documents, so how to implement such and such a system or an approach or methodology. Then we had technical briefs. So these are familiar by being short and sweet, maybe 2-3 pages, outlining a technology, methodology of implementation. And generally, they don't go into too much on operational maintenance or institutional or social issues. Then also we found guidance on sector standards, for example, the sphere guidance or government
government standards, etc. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the SPHERE guidebook, the SPHERE guidebook is a minimum standards for operations in emergency context. So within that, there's a section on WASH, and there you find standards that we must adhere to in the humanitarian sector. Okay, and quite importantly, we noted that guidance was also directed at different audiences. Okay, so we had development practitioners, targeted guidance. We had guidance directed for governments and municipalities, and then we had guidance specifically for humanitarian or emergency practitioners. And this is quite important in our findings, actually, was that a lot of the guidance out there was mostly that, especially covered the full sanitation chain, was mainly targeted at development practitioners. And I'll talk about a little bit about that later. So just to briefly show you the part of our analysis, but I mainly want to just point out that here you see we looked at each of the guidance that was out there and looked at how they covered steps in the sanitation chain. So right from the user interface to transport, to treatment, on-site, off-site, and to disposal of fecal sludge. So we looked at that one with regard to covering technologies specifically for that part of the sanitation chain, but also for the operational maintenance factors. And then also we looked whether the guidance also was specifically mentioning or targeting emergency response. The findings regarding this was there is a heavy focus on design of latrines, and generally the latter stages of the sanitation chain, so for example transporting, disposal, treatment of the fecal sludge was often ignored or only lightly mentioned, so not really giving kind of full guidance or full information on how to manage that. Guidance on conveyance transport, okay, was somehow covered, but really not delving too deeply into the different emptying technologies that are available. There was insufficient guidance on the interconnections along the sanitation chain. So this was a key gap, especially in the guidance that was specifically for the humanitarian sector. Technologies were presented, but without linking them, for example, latrines, linking them with how you would empty it, how you would move the sludge, how you would treat it. So this linkages along the sanitation chain was really not there. There was also insufficient guidance on operation maintenance and specifically on the management of fecal sludge, so at that end part of the sanitation chain. And there was insufficient guidance covering fecal sludge management in contingency planning. So there were 3 WASH preparedness guides that were reviewed. So looking at outlining planning elements for the different WASH interventions. And there was no checklist or guidance on how to emphasizing the importance of incorporating fecal sludge management into preparedness and contingency planning. So this was also another key gap. Then also, some of you may be aware that the SPHERE guidelines are being reviewed. Now I think they've, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they've published the reviewed version. And it is an improvement on the previous version in that they do mention, and specifically on fecal sludge, on the transport and disposal and treatment of fecal sludge. However, there is really no mention on the sanitation chain as such, which is one gap that we also found. So in the whole research, we looked at a behavior change framework, so trying to understand why people used or didn't use guidance and how and in what situations. And we also did a barrier analysis, which focused on identifying what is preventing people from really using and implementing guidelines on fecal sludge management in first phase emergency, and what are the enablers to this behavior. So, but I won't go into the entire results of the behavior change framework, but which include different determinants and things like this and motivators. But what I do think is interesting for today is some of the behavior of people using the guidelines. So people reported that they did use guidelines. So nearly 72% of people said they consulted guidelines regularly. SEER guidelines are most commonly consulted. Some consultation of guidelines on decisions around Blackwater and FFM, some, not a lot, and there was low utilization of guidelines on fecal sludge operational factors. In general, only 1/3 of respondents is classified as actual doers, so those that consulted guidelines and actually performed the used guidance in their decision-making factors. So I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. So yeah, here you see that people most always or sometimes use guidelines. We have 4% of people never use guidelines, or 6% of people rarely use guidelines to make decisions in fecal sludge management in emergency. The SPEAR guideline were the most popularly used guidelines that respondents reported, with nearly 64% of people using SPEAR guidelines. And also another point worth noting is that 56% of people used access information on the clusters for guidance on their decision making. Now then, from those respondents that said they accessed information from clusters, clusters are, just for those of you who are not aware, is this coordination platform that are set up in humanitarian response. So there's numerous different clusters for different aspects of humanitarian response. So what would be relevant for us as WASH practitioners would be the WASH cluster. But interestingly, the respondents reported that they used guidelines from different clusters. So there's, for example, food security cluster. People reported that they also used the communication cluster and different types of clusters. So that was quite interesting in our findings. So there was also consultation of guidance around Blackwater and fecal sludge management. So this was an open-ended question we asked. And it was interesting because the question we asked was about which types of decisions you use guidelines for making, and it was only 43% of people used guidelines for making decisions around Blackwater and fecal sludge management. So in these kind of word maps, they're actually statistically, the font size is related to the outcome of the open-ended question, so they are statistically representative. There was low utilization of guidelines for fecal sludge management operational factors, so nobody consulted guidelines, very few people consulted guidelines to understand how to operate and maintain fecal sludge management systems. Then, so this was when respondents were classified as doers, if they always consulted guidelines when faced with real-time decisions regarding management of human waste in first phase emergencies, and use guidelines to help them make decisions regarding fecal sludge or Blackwater disposal methods. So actually, although we had a lot of respondents that said that they consulted guidelines, in the end we only had, out of the 47 respondents that could be classified, only 25 could be classified as doers, so those that actually really use guidelines in their decision making. So also one which somehow parallels with what SuSanA was presenting on, we looked at how people access and utilize guidelines. So where they access the guidelines for making real-time decisions. Guidelines are most commonly accessed online from the respondents' computers or saved locally on computers. There was also little utilization of guidelines through smartphones. This is surprising, actually, or either online through smartphone applications where no respondents reported using. So doers were also asked whether there are any guidelines that they regularly utilize or find particularly useful, to which 11 responded affirmatively. So mostly people named the SPHERE guidelines. Also people used the WEDEC, the Emergency Sanitation Guidelines, or also different guidelines such as the EcoSan Building Guidelines, Oxfam Minimum Wash Requirement Guidelines, and MSF Public Health Engineering Guidelines were also used. And as well, the EWAG compendium was also noted. But in general, people really preferred fact sheets. To a lesser extent also images, illustrations, anything that really was kind of simple and concise to use. So again, this also reflects just similarly into what SuSanA found, was that people like person-to-person or peer-to-peer kind of learning. So when asked about what other resources do people utilize when making decisions, a lot of people stated personal knowledge and experience is what they relied on. Also, people within their, so peer-to-peer learning within their own organization and also from other organizations. However, something that we can also triangulate with a workshop that we held with experts in the wash sector, emergency wash sector, was that peer-to-peer learning is the quickest and most accessible form of learning, and practitioners really have that tendency to draw on personal linkages. But similarly noted is that this is a challenge in terms of generating and promoting the use of guidelines, because this kind of knowledge is quite difficult to capture or mobilize. So almost all respondents really said that they use personal knowledge and experience, but also in the wider discussion as well, there is a heavy reliance on what has been implemented within an organization. So what we're doing, which is the kind of norm within a specific context. And this kind of heavy reliance on what has been implemented previously, we could also discuss that it's a potential limitation on fecal sludge management decision making. Workshop participants also really noted this, highlighting that something called like a practice habit. It's often to do with what's already been done on a previous mission and just basically replicating what a practitioner already knows that works, rather than somehow trying some newer technology or newer innovation. Then just to finally wrap up, one additional thing I wanted to show you was that respondents were asked to rate methods of learning and accessing information from 1 low preference to 5 high preference. So the most preferred resource was on-job learning. So 50% of respondents rating that as a 4 to 5. Also peer-to-peer learning was highly rated, giving 44%. Also shows a clear learning preference through methods that are kind of interpersonal or practical or interpersonal learning. Then there was also, to a lesser extent, people liked workshops, conferences. Again, SuSanA also noted this. And also learning, some people also liked learning through reading or handbooks, paper, or online. Okay, my time is up, so just some kind of bridges to what comes next, which is turning this kind of research into action. So we looked at what everything we had on our desk, and basically there is a considerable amount of guidance and knowledge already there. People say that they use guidance. Maybe 70% of people, respondents, say that they almost or nearly always or almost always consult guidance. So then this calls into question, okay, so if there's guidelines there and if people are using them, why is still there a gap in terms of identifying and implementing the most appropriate fecal sludge solutions for first phase emergencies? Why do we fall short of the mark here? So just some of the key conclusions, some of the reasons why we're still kind of potentially falling short of this, and some how we can bridge these gaps. The research found that in practice, the spectrum of the decision maker, it's not as clear-cut as a WASH practitioner. So there's often people that are making decisions on how to implement fecal sludge management in emergencies that are not necessarily technicians or technical engineers, and that we need to somehow cater better for a full spectrum of diversity in decision makers. Also, the findings reveal that when guidance is consulted, the scenarios described by respondents are generally focused on compliance and spot checking once a solution has been implemented. So this is supported by the scenarios in which respondents said that they would consult guidance for normal or standard cases, or if they're using a technology or solution where they were already familiar with. So meaning that people just wanted to kind of have a reassurance that what they were doing was okay. So, for example, in the SuSanA guidelines, we have standards on how many latrines per person. So we use that as a guidance of making sure that, okay, what we have done is okay. Then also...
sorry, Amy, time.
Okay, yeah, just finishing up now. Also using wrong guidance. So this was what I mentioned about the branding of the guidance, so that there was a significant amount of guidance that covered the full sanitation chain, including fecal sludge management, but it was branded for development practitioners. So we also needed to look at this type of this issue. And then also the sphere as a central resource was insufficient in it and inadequate as a guidance. So a lot of people use sphere, however, however, it was not as a comprehensive guidance manual as it could be. So yeah, now I just want to hand over to Alberto and Emma to talk about.
Thank you, Amy. So thanks to the research of BORDA, we select some barriers and some levers, and for each barrier and lever we find a solution that then we merge together to design our guidance that then will be described more in detail by Emma. So which are these barriers? The first one was the lack of context-specific guidelines, and because of this we wanted to focus on case studies of specific crises, ongoing crises actually, as we will see later. The problem of time consuming to look at guidelines. So the idea is to have a one-stop website and to harmonize the templates of case study, so that people that move from one crisis to another one, they know already the template and they don't spend too much time to know where they can find the information that they need, and then to avoid the inhibition of creativity, we focus more on lesson learned rather than methodological guidelines. Then another barrier was also the access to guidelines. People didn't know where to look for guidance, so the idea is that our guidance will be linked to other already well-known guidance, like for example the SuSanA forum, but we will focus a lot also on the dissemination strategy, and will strengthen the dissemination strategy. Another barrier was the linkage between the different technologies. So what we propose in our guidance is to describe a system or subsystem of technologies that are linked between them. From the analysis of BORDA, there was also some levers, and we try to use these levers also in our guidance. We saw that people that use guidelines, they do it because there is a validation from some coordination mechanism or institution. So the idea is to use our guidance also as a tool for WASH cluster, and specifically for the sanitation technical working group that are active during the crisis, and so the idea is that this guidance will become also a tool for coordination for this sanitation technical working group. Lots of people use guidelines also to verify what they think the solution that they want to implement, and so we think that the case study can still help in this case provide a comparison with what a practitioner wants to do and what they really can do in that context. And also the forum, the idea is to link our guidance to the SuSanA forum, so people can get verification from other practitioners around the world. And for the same reason, we saw another level is the discussion peer-to-peer. So the idea is to have a collaborative platform where all the institutions, all the members of the technical working group, but also other practitioners from around the world can provide comments and lesson learned. And then there is always the link to the forum of SuSanA. So we merge all these small solutions, and now Emma can tell you more about how we design the final panel.
So just to build on what Alberto was saying, so the platform that we developed is called Octopus, which is kind of far-stretched, I know, but we can explain later if you ask us the question why we chose this name. So the idea of this platform is to serve as a sort of pop-up platform for first phases of emergencies, because we're really focusing on the first phase of emergencies. So today we are using the Rohingya crisis as a pilot. As most of you probably know, so the crisis in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh poses extremely significant steeple sludge management challenges. And there is a steeple sludge management technical working group, which was set up by the Global Wash Cluster, and which groups a few NGOs working in FSM, so including us at Solidarites. So with BORDA and this technical working group, and also with a group of critical friends from different NGOs and other organizations, we have developed a case study template. So this is what Alberto was mentioning before. And we have also developed indicators that practitioners have told us were essential for them when they had to take decisions in FSM. So it's the members of this technical working group which are documenting this case study. And so these case studies, the idea is for them to be uploaded as early as possible on the platform and to have them confronted to the feedbacks and to other practitioners from other contexts. So to confront them with their similar experiences that's based on the same indicators. So this, I mean, can first of all allow continuous improvement for the actors implementing FSM in Bangladesh for the pilot and then in other contexts. It also allows for others to have this comparison between contexts on similar fecal sludge treatment systems. So once the first phase of emergency is over, so for Bangladesh, it's when the rainy season will be over, the NGOs will provide lessons learned, and this should help the technical working group elaborate guidance with regards to this specific context. So what our objective was at the beginning of this project was to elaborate guidance on fecal sludge management, which is the most adapted to practitioners. And actually what we found is that it's not actually the format which matters the most, but more of the process, the learning and the dissemination process of what is being done in the field, which is really important and which allows for buy-in and uptake from practitioners. So yes, I think our time is up. So if you have any questions, so the platform is not online yet. We are doing working with a web developing agency, and yeah.
Great, thank you, Emma. Sorry to have to cut you short at the end there. But if anybody has any questions on this, what I'm going to do is continue on to Dorothy, and then we'll take all the questions at the end. And yeah, as Emma said, this website isn't live yet, but as soon as it is, I'm sure it will be announced on the platform on SuSanA for those of you who are emergency focused, and through Working Group 8 we can send an email round to those of you who are most likely to want to use this. Just so you're aware, there has been ongoing discussion between SuSanA and Solidarite about how we can support each other. so they're not being done in isolation. Is quite important. I think that this is being done as a kind of coordinated approach, recognising the strengths of both platforms and the differences. So yeah, on that note, I'm going to hand over to Dorothy to discuss a little bit about Working Group 1 on capacity development and how the findings from especially the SuSanA study, but also to a certain extent what BORDA and Solidarites have found is useful for SuSanA.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'm going first to present a little bit the working group and then also show some examples of activities that we have to try to address the needs of our members a little bit better. I have to, okay. So Shobana mentioned the goal of SuSanA already. I don't go into details here. But there are also some specific objectives of SuSanA, and what is important to know is that capacity development is the overarching topic of SuSanA, and there are specific 2 objectives which include knowledge management and capacity development. It's collecting and compiling information which will assist decision makers, and it's the second specific objective, facilitate the planning and implementation of sustainable sanitation systems and services by developing and promoting appropriate tools and capacity development. So the topic of capacity development is an overarching topic. I mentioned it, and also a lot of partners actually, when you look at the statistics of SuSanA, they are either active in capacity development or at least interested in. So what is capacity development as a working group? We define it as follows. Here are two the official definitions. Most of you probably know of them. What we can learn about them is that capacity development is about capabilities and capacities, and it's about unleashing, strengthening, creating, but also maintaining them. And the other thing we can learn that it takes place at different levels, so the individual level, the organizational level, but also the societal level, so the enabling environment around it. The Working Group 1 has set itself 6 objectives. These include knowledge management and sharing, of course. So that means compiling resources, training manuals, and so on related to capacity development. It's about communication. It's about coordination, so provide a space for members to connect and maybe develop projects together. It's about a learning exchange, and what is new in the past year, it's also about research. So that means understanding better the gaps in capacity development resources and activities, and to highlight how these might be fed in. And another objective is advocacy. So how does the working group work? The key role it has is really to be a focal point for all these several thousand members, and the networking opportunity to find material, but also like-minded people. And on the other hand, together with the Secretariat, we work on collecting training materials, information on courses, and putting them online on the webpage. And we have some regional meetings and discussions like this one here. So there are 2 main aspects of what we do. There is the what, so the material, which I talked about a lot, and there is also the why and how, which so how do we do knowledge management and capacity development, and where are the gaps? So these 2 aspects of why and how and the what address 2 different parts of our members or groups of our members, and especially the why and how, understanding the gaps and how to fill them. SuSanA plays a key role as an informal and kind of neutral network to discuss those among different partners. There are a lot of Working Group 1 products. These are products developed as part under the SuSanA umbrella by some members of the organization, but there are also some Working Group 1 related products like the Airwalk MOOCs or course products or some other online courses. And With related products, I mean not really products developed under SuSanA, but products that use the working group to join forces and also to use SuSanA as an overarch, as an outreach platform. And I think that that's a very, very good service that this working group provides. So how do we communicate? I think that's always important to say again. There is the forum, we have this meeting, and there is also a working group one mailing list, which everyone can use. And what is really important, because we are an informal network, is that any of the members of the group can take over entirely or partly the responsibility for any work or a specific activity. So please really, if you have ideas, use the forum to find other people and to bring that further. So what's new, recent activities I mentioned, we reshaped the objectives to better reflect what really our activities and core areas of interest are, including these research aspects. And we also set up a new training material section on SuSanA.org led by COS. And this included the systematic collection categorization of material from all members and partners, and revising the whole setup of the library. This part of the presentation should be presented by Darren, but I go on. So what we plan for the coming year, there are two main things. There is a new working group one fact sheet, and I want to make a little bit of advertisement about that here, so I'm talking about it, as do you stop me if I don't have time. And there is the meeting in Stockholm. It's on Sunday morning. You can find more information on the forum later on. So to talk about this fact sheet is very important for us and our members to do advocacy, but also mainly to do advocacy, actually. And the first version is from 2009. There is an updated version from 2012. There were over 19 members of the working group that contributed, and it contained a definition of capacity development for sustainable sanitation. What is capacity development? Some instrument for capacity development, and an overview on SuSanA capacity development members and partners, and their materials and activities related to that. So that actually provided a nice lookup table for people interested in finding any type of material or organization, because they were provided directly with the contact details and address to call. And yeah. So why do we need to update this fact sheet? I think today we better understand the gaps in capacity development, and there is also the SDGs that have come up. We have written a position paper as working group, what could be our contribution to the Agenda 2030, and there is also a new SuSanA vision document and the Sustainable Sanitation and the SDGs interlinkages document, which was developed by the core group. And these documents could be kind of the basis to do an updated version of the fact sheet. I don't want to go into detail of the structure of this, but what is new past to the old one is that we really would like to focus on highlighting the gaps and how these gaps can be filled. And we would also like to highlight more the importance that there is not only a need for technical guidance, so hardware, capacity and training material, but also there is a need for training materials and capacity development materials focusing on the functionality of projects, on the software aspect. So why I'm talking that much about it, I would like you all invite you all to contribute to the new fact sheet update, and there is a link. You can access this presentation later on. There's a link for the forum, this discussion about this topic. So another activity which we've been working a lot on is this new training material section on the library. And that was actually led by COS, so by Darren. And COS, as a part of a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant, which was called Scaling Up Capacity Building in Non-Sewer Sanitation, was collecting and collating training resources related to non-sewer sanitation. Because scaling up, of course, needs capacity development. This, on one hand, allows in the future organizations to avoid duplication. They can accept training materials online, use it, and don't have to reproduce it. On the other hand, it also shows quite a nice picture of where there is nothing available. So where we have to work in order to provide the required material. So far, about 86 manuals and games and activities and syllables have been collected. The reason why we include syllables is that some universities, they don't really want to share their original organization, but it was only an outline about it. But still, this outline can be helpful to then contact the people and get more information. And we actually would like to complete this list of 86 material or items with more material from our partners, and you are all invited as well. In case you have within your organization any training material related to sustainable sanitation, to write to us and we can upload that for you in order to share it with the rest of the working group. And that's basically that. So in case you would, if you haven't done it yet, to join our working group, there's the different channels how you can reach us. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to note the link between not just learning but how we translate it. And I actually think so. Martin's asked probably my favourite question on all of this, which I'm going to put to Emma first because she got cut off a little bit from her presentation. But I also think it's important feeding back to Dorothy and Working Group 1. It may be a mixture of formal and informal communication tools, but how do we get, what are the incentives for people sharing what doesn't work? And failure is quite a strong word, but it is important to share not just successes, but where things go wrong. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear, Emma, with Octopus, how to incentivize the sharing of failure or not quite smooth running. And then possibly, Dorothy, if you can add how Working Group 1 and possibly an informal sharing mechanism can help with that.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And I'm going to know if we'll be able to overcome it, to overcome this challenge, which is a challenge faced in all sectors, not just sanitation and fecal sludge management. But we're hoping, so like I was telling you, there's going to be this there is this technical working group which gathers different NGOs, and it's actually a space with a trust relationship. So it's an open discussion space where people speak freely, and we're hoping that they will be able to transfer all this discussions going on and all the lessons coming out of it into the case studies that will be developed. So we're hoping that the people who are, so I think it's Oxfam, but like, I mean, in general, the people leading these technical working groups are able to kind of to encourage trust and to encourage people to admit failure. And I mean, it's this whole change in mentality that needs to be encouraged by teachers, I think, for my talk. So we're hoping that this the structure of our learning process will enable this. I don't know if we'll manage.
It's a real challenge. And Dorothy, from Working Group 1 perspective, how can we encourage?
So as a working group, we have been working not really specific on this topic, but what for us was always important to have regional meetings where people engage personally together, and in these meetings we always provided a space for everyone to present their projects. And the culture of discussing these projects, not critically, but just neutrally, the positive, the successes and the failures, was quite well established in the past, and I think quite is. Now you ask how to encourage in the future. Maybe we should hand over this question to Susan then. You mentioned in the chat we should hand over this question to Susan Davis. Is she there or not?
She's actually left, and the reason is were you at the event in Reddit?
No.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, there was recently an event at the Reddit conference around sharing failures. So it happens to be I happen to be involved with the project as well. So this was cooked up with Susan, myself, and 2 other people. And the whole idea was a little bit of gamification around sharing failure, but actually to lead to some valid discussion. The thing we're finding is that sharing failures is much easier done face-to-face than it is written, or we find the written word is taken much more seriously, and it's more open to interpretation, whereas when you deliver something face-to-face, you can sugarcoat it a bit, but still get your point across. And so the challenge that we're having is how to share this in the right forum. And Susan's done some work on pre-mortems, which is the idea of identifying where your failure could come before you start your project. And that's why it would be really useful to get her inputs on this. It's a really good approach. But Shabana, I mean, SuSanA's been going a long time, and sharing a failure has been something that we've tried to encourage for a long time. And I guess we're digressing a little bit now on the conversation, because not everything is a failure, and what's going on in Cox's Bazar, there's a lot of successes. But I guess it's around creating an environment, a friendly environment for sharing, both positives and negatives. And yeah, I mean, did any of this come up in the SuSanA study that you guys did?
I think yes, partially because most of them have written that all the reports are kind of biased. So nobody wants to share their failures because they're reporting on behalf of an organization, and it's considered a black mark or a taboo for the organization to fail in something. Yet we all know in reality that there are failures, and if everything was successful, we would have probably aced SDG 6 long back. There is a gap between accepting failures and then sharing them in a public way. I think we need to move away from failures to learnings, because failure is often a very negative term which people don't want to use, and learnings is something organizations might be interested in. Another idea we had in SuSanA was to offer an anonymous space for people to share their failures, but if it had a more positive outlook where people are sharing their learnings rather than failures, it might be more successful. I hope we're able to do this in the future.
Amy, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, so just I was going to type it there, but I just wanted to make the point that we also find peer-to-peer learning as one of the most preferred methods of getting information, getting guidance. And that would also be because if we're standing in the field together looking at a situation, Esther, you're going to say to me, yeah, we tried this before, let's not do that, and you'll also share experiences of your failures and what has kind of come into your experience as a professional. So I think this was also, this failure sharing preference came out also in our research as well.
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder, though, how do other people access it? Because in the emergency world, you do get more movement beyond of personnel, just by nature of emergencies. I do wonder from a development point of view how we can recreate that when generally people are more static. But also, I think the other thing that came out in Martin's question is the incentive side. How do we incentivize people to record? So Oxfam are known for turning out field notes about technologies. We've been doing our technical briefs for years, but it's still finding the time and incentivizing it. And how do we get these from a balanced perspective? Because again, what's going on in Cox's Bazar, for those of you that don't know, is there's a number of different FSM technologies that are being trialled to see which have potential for emergency fecal sludge management, but may only have been used in development situations in the past. And it's been really interesting to see the successes of some and the lacking of others, and what's worked and what hasn't. And I guess it's this level of discussion in Cox's Bazar is partly due to a handful of individuals who have really been incentivized to record and document, and that WASH cluster role, which Octopus taps into. But from a development world, that's where kind of in my head SuSanA is not, say, the WASH cluster, but that coordinating body. But then how do we incentivize the contribution of the actors within that organisation to be more proactive? And as Dorothy says, you know, we've got certain initiatives already around the fact sheet and the position paper, but how do we now translate these in the same way that Octopus is going to try and do? You know, do we need...
I think case studies are a very, very powerful tool to share learnings and reflect on failures in a kind of a neutral way. And the case studies of SuSanA in the past have been documenting case studies, right? Talking about openly what has been working and what not. And I think the Octopus approach of having the information presented as case studies might be interesting to look at more precisely.
Yeah, Amy, you've also said case studies, so I assume you feel the same way. And Emma and Alberto, what are you finding people are willing to write these case studies and contribute them onto Octopus?
Well, a leading role is the one of the Sanitation Technical Working Group, and also the Global WASH Cluster that should ask the different technical working group around the world to ask for collection of information on case studies. And then, of course, the other resource that we need is the time. So we need to provide people that have the time to do it in the field.
That I think is a challenge in most sectors. And Martin's made a good point here that case studies are good, but they need to be followed up a year or so later. And I think I know that's planned for the Cox's Bazar case studies, because that's part of the approach has been to test these technologies and then see how they're faring in 6 months' time. And that's not always the case. We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, we have one question which has been asked twice actually by Lazarus Shamadou, which I just would like to read if that's okay. I think it's addressed to Shobana. The question reads, have you been able to establish why there are huge gaps between knowledge and practice? Only 25% dowers is quite staggering a difference. I'm not sure if the question...
So just to interrupt, that was directed for us, and it's for the doer and non-doer. I think to go into all the nuances of exactly what define doers and non-doers in behavior change, I don't think we have time right now, but I've somehow answered Lazarus there, and I'm also happy to talk one-on-one with him. But one thing was that the people that's worth noting was that there are people who generally do access guidelines in all parts of their life and their work. So there's certain personalities of people that are generally would go and read the manual before they assemble their IKEA furniture, you know, and then there's those of us who don't. So this was also something that could have come out with in our research as well. There's people that generally access guidelines in general, not just on fecal sludge management, and then there's people who prefer to just chat with their friend on the desk or talk or just, go with their own intuitive methods or whatever. So that's one point.
Okay, there was another question as to the presentation. Are they going to be available on the forum? The PowerPoints, are they going to be available on?
Yeah, I'll make sure that they get posted on the discussion thread for the announcement. Just on what Amy was saying about doers and non-doers and reading instructions and not reading instructions, at Oxfam we're currently working on some infographics for this, so very much based on improving best practice, because we're finding similar things, that people are not necessarily asking basic questions and finding out certain things. So we are doing some research on using infographics and things to see whether we could get a better uptake of those questions and people asking them more, because some people don't want to read the instructions, so they don't want to read long, lengthy guidance notes. So we're wondering if we use illustrations, and those are actually going to be published in the next month or so, and we'll be putting them on SuSanA because we want to see if the uptake of them from others, we want to get the feedback and see if it's an improved methodology for others, that having a middle ground between talking to someone and reading lengthy guidance, whether that actually improves the quality of basic things that we're seeing in the field. So I just thought I'd check. Okay. Any more questions or comments at this stage?
There's one starting the video to Amy, okay. But maybe we have to direct that to the forum, give the time.
Yeah, it's about videos. That's quite an interesting question, actually. It's whether videos are a preferred option or because guidelines don't contain videos in the first place.
So there was actually videos are a preferred option. They're very short and sweet, YouTube videos, etc. But they're not being utilised enough in the sector.
Interesting. So do you think that more need to be made, or that there are enough out there that people don't access them, possibly because of the internet? That is also something we might be looking into at Oxfam. Okay, so I am going to end it there. If you have any more questions, please feel free to type them into the discussion thread. I'll make sure that the presenters are made aware of any questions specific to them, and the webinar will be available on the YouTube channel, and I will put PDF versions of all the presentations up so that they're light for you to download. Thank you again to our presenters, and I personally found it really useful and interesting, and I hope everyone else did. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shalana.
Thank you.